Hello, I am Horan, and this is my first video and part of a short series about WoW's Endgame, so please give feedback and remember to like it if you did and subscribe to see the fruits of your feedback on this channel, one dedicated not to just WoW but also other MMOs as well. Links to my Twitter page down below. A retrospective of Endgame questing and its future in WoW. So after and even during Battle for Azeroth, a lot of negative feedback has incurred about the world quests and emissary system, to the point in which Blizzard returned to an old feature, forgotten since patch 6.2, dailies. Dailies are the most, if not only, common endgame solo content of WoW, and harken back to Classic, but it's only in TPC that they've seen widespread use throughout the whole game. Whereas reputation grinds back then were based on either mob mowing down or lockboxes, TBC added, aside dungeon runs, dailies as a way to earn more or quicker reputation. Ogrila, Shatari Skyguard and then Netherwing at first, before adding Quel'Thanas in the last patch of the expansion, in which dailies also progressed the app. In Wrath, dailies were intermixed once more with dungeon grinds via Tabard, but if you wanted the more odd reputations, usually not tied directly to player power, you add 2 dailies to gain various cosmetics. The formula was further shaken up during the Ultimate Tournament patch, but the basic premise remained the same. Cataclysm saw dailies, and in general the number of reputations dwindle, outliers being Pharazane and Paladin's Wardens at launch and of course Molten Front in 4.2, with a pool of dailies expanding slowly as you progress the reputation and the storyline tied to it. The Molten Front formula was then replicated to its full extent in Mist of Pandaria up to 5.2. Every reputation had dailies to do, and some reputations had also some sub-reputations to specific NPCs to gain favor with for better rewards or side stories. Not all but most reputations had also a plotline unlocked at those specific thresholds up to Exalted. A fondly remembered example is the 5.1 faction reputation, with well-spread thresholds for the story presented. A Quel'Thanas but server-wide system was presented for the Thunder King patch, in which the story and the Isle of Thunder areas were unlocked by the Vault server during the dailies. Yet, the system was swiftly dismissed by the last patch of the expansion, that included only a couple of weeklies and otherwise a very freeform bag of content, the Timeless Isle, and that the two overwhelmingly bad feedback Blizzard received since the start of Pandaria mostly tied to the player power gated behind reputations. Reputations at the start of Mist in fact not only were necessary to buy high-level gear from vendors, but also to access other reputations which also had gear. With a lack of power giving endgame content such as Mythic Plus as an alternative, the first patch of Mist of Pandaria saw many hardcore players burn out in the attempt to line up as many days a day in order to attain the gear they needed for progression, and by 5.1 the situation was too far gone despite Blizzard's attempt to make the grind less painstaking or make it skippable altogether. Dailies and reputations based grind for power would be almost forgotten by the start of Warlords, together with most Outworld content until the second patch, whose reputations in Tana and Jungle were tied at best to flying and at worst to cosmetics or quality of life items. In Legion, dailies were gone altogether, replaced by world quests and emissary system, and tied again to player power through the rewards of the quests themselves, and the daily, or every 3 days meta reward of the emissary. While before dailies gave reputation and a success to gear, gold and maybe currency, in Legion world quests could give outright gear and if not AP, aka a power up for your weapons and, in Battle for Azeroth, your necklace, which influenced the player power. The system was pushed with almost no changes into Battle for Azeroth, and almost immediately player feedback about boredom and lack of reputations differences were to be heard. A system that unified all reputations into the same model on top of a widespread reward that felt lackluster or too grindy pushed Blizzard to experiment in 8.2 and then in 8.3 with mixing the old daily system and the new world quests system. If Mechagon is comprised of just dailies with a big daily world quest for the bigger reward, Nazjatar has both world quests with chances at the emissary on top and daily quests of the typical grinding nature. In 8.3, The big reward quest is weekly or twice every week, depending on the two reputation stone swaps, and otherwise you got pools of dailies. The major player feedback point that has been repeated ad nauseam by most YouTubers and in the forums is that these reputations grinds are tied to player power, not just flying like in Warlords and Legion, but also gear, AP, and essences, a new system introduced in it to further customize characters' abilities and gated behind some reputation thresholds. In early BFA, but also Legion, the presence of AP made it so people felt the need to grind endlessly world quests, or islands, or back in the day, more souls, in order to maximize AP gains and thus the strength of their gear. In general, the gist seems to be that, regardless of expansion, content or length of the grind, players, or at least the vocal part of the players, find negative the connection between quest grind and power. First of all, let us set aside one key point. The issue is world/daily quest grind, not grinding to core. Certainly islands have also received poor feedback, despite being grindy, but being, for the vast majority of people, entirely avoidable lessened the issue. Islands had a reward and difficulty problem, not a content problem. One could also make a point that questing content is inherently flawed, but short of changing entirely how mechanically questing works in WoW, it's an academic discussion. So, the main problem is the rewards. Long rep quest grinds with cosmetic or quality of life only rewards are well received. Long or even just too repetitive and easy grinds for actual power rewards tend not to be. Legion and more so BFA are particularly guilty of the latter, binding AP and partly high level gear to world quests and islands grinds. There's also the matter of how to make said grinds less obnoxious. If we go by player agency, the world quests and emissary way of delivering the content is definitely better. There's more choice, and there's less the feeling of missing out if you decide to skip a day or two worth of quests. In change, the choice brings the hardcore players to burn themselves out by trying to complete all world quests present at any given time in order to maximize rewards income, a tendency exacerbated by the Paragon system, offering bonus rewards for continuing the grind. Daily quests, while giving a very narrow set of options for the grind, don't allow for burnout since once they're done for the day, there's close to nothing else players can do to speed up the process, but you do risk missing out on the schedule if you buy enemies cannot do or do not want to do your dailies. This in 8.3 is made even more clear due to the need of coalescing visions to access the visions of the Zoth, source of both legendary cloak upgrades and gear upgrades. The obvious solution seems to completely detach endgame questing to player power. No more AP, no more gear drops from simple questing, and at best, catch-up gear from reputation vendors. This way, players will not either burn themselves out from doing world quests or fear of remaining behind if they don't do dailies daily. It does not mean dailies or world quests shouldn't have meaningful rewards, but the rewards should be cosmetics, such as transmog. Raise your hand if you hadn't wanted the actual Shadow Pan set from Mists. Set or pieces, mounts, side plot lines, or quality of life items such as the Infinite Rune or a similar flask, less powerful than the actual alchemy flask, stuff like that. Rewards that, while not key to tackle harder content, make the game deeper, more varied, more customized and customizable. In this context, dailies are fine, but it is my opinion emissaries will do the job better, giving also player choice. There will always be players who rush to do all the content available to do for them in a given day, but this way those players will be those the content is aimed at. There is no reason players who just enjoy dungeons shouldn't be able to chain dungeons and be rewarded for that and in the dungeon context without needing to do quests, emissaries or the like if they don't like them. Same for raiders or quest lovers. People will want those not power related rewards will do the quests anyway. We've seen it before, and thus that content will be there for them, or for those who really enjoy questing and see every facet of the story of the game, and people who really enjoy their dungeons and raids. And as a last point, not every reputation needs to be tied to endgame questing, although more story is always welcome. Grinding mobs can be as satisfying, or gathering materials and the like. With this, we are at the end of the video and see you in the next one, dedicated to free bubble content in WoW, such as scenarios and island expeditions. See you there!